I used to think grief was loud. That it would come like sobs I couldn't stop, knees giving out, a sound ripping out of my chest in front of everyone. But standing inside St. Alden's Episcopal Church in Asheville, North Carolina, I learned something different. Grief is quiet. It settles in the lungs. It slows your hands. It makes the world feel padded, like every sound has been wrapped in cotton so you don't shatter all at once. The church smelled of polished oak and white lilies, the kind of lilies Evan hated because he said they looked too perfect for funerals. The pews gleamed under soft yellow light, freshly wiped down, as if someone thought shine could substitute for comfort. Somewhere behind me, the organ hummed low, not quite music, just a reminder that time was still moving forward even though mine had stopped. My son was 41 when pancreatic cancer finally took him. A tech entrepreneur who built his first app in a college dorm room, who used to explain algorithms to me at the kitchen table with sugar packets and napkins because he said that was easier than code. A man who should have been arguing with investors, planning product launches, complaining about back pain that came from sitting too long, not lying still in a casket lined with cream silk. For 3 years, I watched cancer take him piece by piece. Clinical trials at Duke University Hospital. Experimental treatments with names too long to pronounce. Weeks where the scans looked promising, followed by nights where the pain came back harder, crueler, unapologetic. I learned how to read his face instead of the monitors. Learned the difference between discomfort and real fear. Learned how to sleep in a vinyl hospital chair without ever fully closing my eyes. When the doctors ran out of options, I stayed anyway. I stayed when he couldn't keep food down. I stayed when he apologized for being a burden. I stayed when he asked me, once, very quietly, if I was scared to lose him. I told him the truth. I was already losing him. I just wasn't leaving. Now I stood in the front pew, hands folded so tightly in my lap that my fingers had gone numb, staring at the closed casket that held what was left of my only child. Around me sat the people who had walked parts of this road with us. Caleb Roth, Evan's co-founder, sat 3 rows back, shoulders rounded forward like a man who had aged 10 years in one season. He hadn't shaved. His tie hung loose, forgotten. Caleb was the one who had taken over the company when Evan could no longer sit through board meetings, who visited the hospital with spreadsheets and jokes Evan pretended not to understand. On my left was Dr. Naomi Feldman, his oncologist. She wasn't supposed to be here. Doctors usually keep their distance once treatment ends. But she had crossed that line months ago, when Evan's case stopped being professional and started being personal. She squeezed my hand once, firm and grounding, the way she used to before delivering scan results. Behind her sat Ruth Ellison, Evan's high school computer science teacher. She had driven in from Hendersonville that morning. She once told me she knew Evan was different the first time he corrected her code without embarrassing her in front of the class. He was kind about being brilliant, she'd said. Not many people are. The minister had just begun the opening prayer when the doors at the back of the church opened. The hinges creaked just enough to pull attention. Shoes clicked against stone. I felt the shift before I turned my head, the subtle tightening of bodies, the instinctive reaction of people who sense disruption even before they understand it. She walked in like she had rehearsed it. Maribel Sloan, Evan's ex-wife. She wore a tailored black dress that hugged her frame without a wrinkle, 4-inch heels that clicked with confidence, hair perfectly smoothed back as if she'd come from a meeting instead of a funeral. Her makeup was immaculate. Her face dry. She didn't look at the casket. She scanned the room. Not the way a grieving widow searches for comfort, but the way an auditor surveys assets. Counting. Assessing. Measuring reactions. On either side of her were 2 men in dark suits carrying leather briefcases. Their posture gave them away before anyone could read the subtle embossing on their folders. Hollis and Kane LLP. Charlotte. I knew the firm. Evan had once considered them for a corporate acquisition before choosing someone else. Maribel stopped just inside the aisle. People turned. Whispers moved faster than sound. I felt Dr. Feldman's grip tighten on my hand. Caleb's head snapped up. Ruth Ellison's mouth fell open, just slightly, as if she were watching a scene from the wrong play. The minister faltered. Maribel didn't wait for permission. "I'm here in my capacity as Evan Mercer's lawful spouse," she said, her voice clear, controlled, amplified by the stunned silence. "And I intend to formally assert my spousal standing regarding his estate." For a moment, the words didn't land. They hovered. Then they hit. Not once did she say his name like she missed him. Not once did she look at the man she claimed to mourn. I stared at the casket, at the brass plate engraved with Evan James Mercer, and felt something inside me shift. This was the opening move of a battle she thought I was too broken to fight. And as the church filled with murmurs and stunned breaths, I understood something with terrifying clarity. Some people wait until the body is cold before they show you who they really are. Days after the funeral, silence followed me like a shadow. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that waits. Every phone call felt heavier than the last. Every unknown number made my chest tighten, because I knew, deep down, that Maribel Sloan hadn't walked into St. Albans just to make a statement. She had walked into marked territory. 3 days later, I was sitting in a leather chair that cost more than my first car, inside the Briarwood Trust offices in Raleigh, a building that smelled faintly of old paper, lemon polish, and discretion. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Fayetteville Street, but the blinds were half-drawn, as if even the city had been asked to mind its business. Across from me sat Elaine Porter. Elaine was in her mid-60s, silver hair cut cleanly at her jaw, wire-frame glasses perched low on her nose. She had the kind of stillness that came from decades of managing other people's panic without absorbing it herself. No wasted movements. No unnecessary words. When she spoke, it was with surgical calm, the voice of someone who didn't raise it because she never had to. Beside her was Marcus Ivy, Evan's longtime CPA. Marcus looked tired in a different way than grief. His exhaustion came from years of spreadsheets, audits, and late-night calls when Evan's health dipped but the business couldn't. His tie was neatly knotted, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen the numbers and knew exactly how much was at stake. Elaine folded her hands over a thin leather folder. "Mrs. Mercer," she said gently, "before we begin, I want to acknowledge the loss of your son. Evan was meticulous. Even near the end." That word, meticulous, made my throat tighten. Evan had always been like that. Organized to the point of obsession. Lists upon lists. Backups for his backups. He used to joke that chaos was just a bug waiting to be fixed. Elaine slid the folder toward the center of the table. "This is the final will and testament of Evan James Mercer," she said. "Executed 18 months before his death, witnessed, notarized, and legally binding under North Carolina law." Marcus cleared his throat once, not nervously, just as a signal that this was real now. Elaine opened the folder. She didn't rush. She read with the same steady cadence she likely used in courtrooms and boardrooms across the state. Evan's estate was extensive. Equity holdings. Intellectual property rights. Residuals from acquisitions finalized just months before his diagnosis worsened. A portfolio that reflected not just success, but foresight. I listened, hands folded in my lap, my heart beating slower with every paragraph, not because I was relieved, but because something inside me was settling into place. Then Elaine reached the line that changed everything. "And I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, assets, interests, and holdings to my mother, Linda Mercer, to be held solely in her name, without contest or condition." She looked up. Not at me, at the room. Silence pressed in. Marcus didn't react. He already knew. He'd helped structure parts of it. I felt the breath leave my lungs in a way I hadn't expected. Not shock. Not triumph. Just confirmation. Evan hadn't hesitated. Elaine continued, flipping the page with care. There is no provision, financial or otherwise, made for Maribel Sloan. The name landed like a dropped glass. Elaine didn't flinch. Furthermore, she said, her tone unchanged, the divorce between Evan Mercer and Maribel Sloan was finalized in Wake County Superior Court 15 years ago. The settlement included a full and irrevocable waiver clause, forfeiting any future claims, financial, spousal, or otherwise, against Mr. Mercer or his estate. She paused, then added quietly, that clause was reaffirmed 3 separate times, including once after Mr. Mercer's cancer diagnosis. That detail mattered. It meant Evan had revisited the decision. It meant this wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. Across the table, Maribel's attorneys exchanged a look. They were good at hiding reactions, but not perfect. One adjusted his cuff. The other flipped a pen between his fingers once, then stilled it. Their confidence, the sharp, predatory edge I'd seen at the funeral, dulled just slightly. Maribel herself sat very still. Her face didn't change. Not at first. Then her jaw tightened. Given the complexity of the estate, one of the attorneys said carefully, "We'd like time to review the documentation." Elaine nodded once. "Of course," she replied. "You'll be provided copies of everything. Transparency benefits all parties." She closed the folder. Meeting adjourned. As chairs shifted and papers were gathered, I realized something that surprised me. Evan had done the hard part already. All that remained was seeing how far his ex-wife was willing to go to pretend he hadn't meant exactly what he wrote. As the conference room at Briarwood Trust emptied, I stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary. Elaine Porter was gathering her papers with the same precise movements she'd had all morning. Marcus Ivy gave me a small nod, supportive, restrained, professional. The door closed softly behind Maribel Sloan and her attorneys, the click of the latch echoing louder than it should have. That sound pulled me backward in time. Because Maribel leaving rooms was not new to me. She had always been very good at exits. The first time she left, it was during Evan's first failed chemotherapy cycle. I remember the date because Evan had circled it on the kitchen calendar in red ink, hopeful the way only someone who still believed effort could bend fate. The treatment had gone badly. His white blood cell count crashed. The nausea didn't stop. He came home thinner, quieter, trying to pretend he wasn't scared. Maribel lasted 3 weeks. 3. Then one morning, she stood in the doorway of their apartment, arms crossed, keys already in her hand. "I didn't sign up for this," she said. By the end of that week, she was gone. Scottsdale, Arizona. Golf courses. A fresh start, she called it, like illness was a bad neighborhood she'd finally escaped. She posted photos online, hiking trails, wine tastings, smiling selfies with captions about choosing peace. Meanwhile, Evan was learning how to walk again after surgery. She wasn't there for the Whipple procedure that left him folded in on himself for weeks. She wasn't there when he woke up disoriented, asking for water and then apologizing for asking. She wasn't there during the layoffs at his startup, when he insisted on personally calling every employee to explain why he couldn't keep them on while undergoing treatment. And she was certainly not there when hospice came. That's when Terrence Bloom entered our lives. Terrence worked the night shift, tall, soft-spoken, with tired eyes that carried both patience and sadness in equal measure. He never rushed. Never spoke louder than necessary. He treated Evan like a person, not a process. Terrence saw everything. He was there when Evan couldn't sleep because the pain medication made his thoughts race. There when Evan whispered regrets he'd never said out loud. There when Evan asked him, once, if it was wrong to feel relieved that the fight was ending. Terrence told me later, standing in our kitchen with a mug of untouched coffee between his hands, he never asked for her. Not once. During the day, it was often Lydia Cho who filled the gaps. Lydia was Evan's product manager, brilliant, practical, relentlessly loyal. She drove him to appointments when I couldn't. Sat in waiting rooms with her laptop open, pretending to work while watching the clock. She knew which nurses smiled too much and which ones you could trust with hard questions. She held his phone during meetings when his hands shook too badly to scroll. When Evan's voice weakened, Lydia became his advocate, pushing back on timelines, telling investors no when they tried to squeeze updates out of a dying man. She wasn't family by blood. But she showed up. That was the difference. Maribel had been a wife on paper. Terrence and Lydia were witnesses. Presence leaves a record. Absence does too. While Maribel built a new life in the desert, others quietly stepped into the spaces she abandoned. They learned Evan's routines. His tells. The way his breathing changed when he was in pain. The music that calmed him. The jokes he told when he didn't want anyone to worry. When people ask why Evan left her nothing, I think about that. I think about the nights Terrence sat in the dark so Evan wouldn't feel alone. About Lydia waiting in parking lots outside Duke, engine running, just in case he needed help walking out. About Dr. Feldman calling me from conferences because she didn't want to miss his labs. And I think about Maribel, somewhere in Scottsdale, posting photos about self-care. Absence is a choice. So is presence. Evan made his. Evan made his choice. And Maribel Sloan refused to accept it. 2 weeks after the will was read, the letters started arriving. Thick envelopes with return addresses printed in expensive ink, each one heavier than the last. They came from different firms at first, trial balloons, I later learned, before settling into a single, unmistakable rhythm. Legal pressure. The formal filing landed on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier, signature required. Maribel was contesting the will. Her claims were precise, rehearsed, and cruelly strategic. She alleged undue influence, that Evan, weakened by illness, had been manipulated into rewriting his estate. She filed a motion for an emergency probate freeze, requesting that every account, asset, and holding be locked down until the matter could be adjudicated. And then came the part that hurt more than I expected. The accusations against me. They painted me as controlling, isolating. A mother who had allegedly restricted access, filtered communication, and exerted emotional pressure during Evan's final months. According to Maribel's filings, I had turned my dying son against her. I read the words slowly, line by line, sitting at my kitchen table and with a cup of tea that went cold in my hands. Isolation? As if hospice workers hadn't come and gone daily. As if nurses, doctors, friends, co-workers hadn't been in and out of our home. The cruelty of it wasn't just the accusation. It was the timing. She waited until he couldn't defend himself. Elaine Porter read the filings without expression. When she finished, she looked up at me and asked only one question. "Did you keep records?" I nodded. Because I had learned something during Evan's illness. When your world starts to collapse, documentation is the only thing that stays upright. I had calendars, emails, text messages, medical logs, visitor sign-in sheets from hospice, even handwritten notes Evan insisted on making when he wanted something clarified, notes signed, dated, and scanned. I didn't argue. I didn't respond to Maribel's quiet leaks to mutual acquaintances, the whispers that painted her as the grieving widow shut out by a possessive mother. I stayed silent. And I let the paper speak. The case was assigned to Judge Rebecca Harlan of Mecklenburg County. Judge Harlan had a reputation. She was known for patience, but not indulgence. For listening carefully, then cutting through theatrics with one precise question that unraveled entire arguments. Elaine liked her. That was enough for me. As the emergency hearing approached, Maribel escalated again. Her attorneys sent a formal notice warning that if I didn't agree to a settlement discussion, they would pursue all available remedies, including subpoenas of medical staff, co-workers, and personal correspondence. They wanted to overwhelm me. They underestimated me. Because while Maribel was building a narrative, I was building a record. And somewhere in that mountain of evidence was the truth she couldn't erase. Evan had not been isolated. He had been surrounded by people who stayed. If you're still watching but haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself why. Stories like this don't survive because they're sensational. They survive because people who understand what loyalty costs refuse to scroll away. Subscribe now. The first video appeared on a Sunday night. Not on television. Not in court filings, but on LinkedIn. It was posted under Maribel Sloan's name at 9:47 p.m., accompanied by a caption that read like restraint but carried accusation in every comma. Grief looks different for everyone. I just wish I'd been allowed to say goodbye. The video itself was carefully edited, 36 seconds long, soft lighting, subdued music. It showed Maribel standing on the edge of a stage at a tech conference from years ago. Evan stepped into frame briefly, smiling, waving at someone off camera. The clip cut before he moved away from her. To anyone who didn't know the timeline, it looked like intimacy interrupted. By morning, it had thousands of reactions. Comments poured in: sympathy, outrage, speculation. People asked why she hadn't been mentioned in the will. Others assumed she had been pushed out, silenced, erased. Then came Instagram. A carousel post followed, black and white photos from Evan's early startup days. Group shots cropped so tightly you'd think Maribel was always just out of frame, never absent, just unseen. Screenshots of old emails, timestamps blurred, context removed. A caption about being written out of your own life. She never mentioned me by name. She didn't have to. The implication did the work. Elaine called me at 7:12 a.m. the next morning. She's trying to win the public before the judge, she said. I told her I knew. By noon, the foundation's inbox was flooded. Donors asking questions. Partners asking for clarification. A hospital liaison from Mission Health requesting a pause on announcements until things settled. That's when Jasmine Ortega walked into my office. Jasmine had volunteered with the foundation since Evan's diagnosis. Former crisis communications director for a nonprofit in Durham, she had the kind of calm that only comes from having seen fires burn out on their own. She didn't ask if I wanted to respond. She asked how. I told her I didn't want to clap back. No statements soaked in emotion. No defensive videos. No point-by-point Instagram rebuttals. Jasmine nodded. Then we document, she said. We don't argue. We archive. That afternoon, we began building a timeline. Not a narrative, facts. Dates of Maribel's departure. Flight records to Scottsdale. Hospital admission logs. Visitor sign-ins. Text messages Evan sent asking coworkers, not her, for help. Calendar entries showing who showed up and when. Every piece time-stamped. Every document authenticated. Meanwhile, Theo Ramirez reached out. Theo was an investigative tech journalist with WRAL, known for patience and precision. He didn't want a quote. He wanted access. "I'm not interested in drama," he told Jasmine. "I'm interested in sequence." We gave him nothing exclusive, just permission to review what would eventually become public record. While Maribel's videos climbed in engagement, something else happened quietly. Her comments began to shift. People noticed inconsistencies. Someone recognized a conference photo date that predated the illness by years. Another pointed out that Evan had spoken publicly about being divorced at a SaaS summit in San Jose. Theo published a short piece, not accusatory, just factual, titled "Timeline Questions Emerge in Mercer Estate Dispute." No conclusions. No opinions. Just dates. And dates are stubborn things. I didn't watch Maribel's videos again. Instead, I sat with Jasmine and cross-checked timestamps. Because I had learned this the hard way, truth doesn't trend. But it accumulates. And once it's heavy enough, it doesn't need to shout. The hum of the refrigerator filled the kitchen that night. Outside, the January wind rattled the window panes of the Asheville home I had shared with Evan for most of his life. I poured a glass of water, but I didn't drink. Not yet. I needed quiet, because what I was about to do required more than attention, it demanded presence. Elaine had called earlier that afternoon. "Linda," she said, her voice low and careful, "I found something in Evan's final documents you should hear. It's under attorney-client privilege. No one else can touch it. Not the lawyers. Not the court. Only you." My hands trembled as I took the sealed envelope from the courier. It was plain, unmarked, except for Evan's handwriting, "Mom. For you. Listen when the world feels too loud." I carried it to the kitchen table, the same one where we had celebrated his promotions, his birthdays, the small victories after chemotherapy rounds that left him dizzy and laughing through tears. I opened the USB drive inside the envelope. There was a single audio file. I hesitated, pressed play, and then I heard him. "Mom," he said, voice soft but steady, "I need you to know. I made my choices. I chose the people who showed up, the ones who stayed when it counted. I chose you. Always you. If anyone else tries to rewrite that story, know that it doesn't change what we had, what we built. They can make noise, but it can't undo years of presence, years of care." I pressed pause, clutched the edge of the table. My chest tightened, not with grief, not fully, but with recognition. Recognition that the choice he made had been deliberate. That his trust in me had never wavered. I played it again. This time, I listened to the part that made my stomach knot. "I know she might come back, Maribel. I know she'll try to claim, to question, to make others doubt. That's her path. But our path? It's ours. Mom, keep moving forward. Protect what matters. Don't let the noise distract you from the work we started." I sat there in silence for several minutes. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. The distant hum of traffic from downtown Asheville seeped in. And I realized this wasn't just a message. It was a mandate. Evan had anticipated the storm. He had foreseen Maribel's return, her lawyers, the social media plays. He had made decisions not out of spite, not for spectacle, but out of clarity. Out of love. And now, through a small recording in a USB drive, he was speaking to me again, guiding me. I closed my eyes. I could almost see him sitting across the table, as he had on so many long nights, laptop open, fingers hovering over code that would later help other patients track their chemotherapy symptoms, monitor side effects, connect with support groups. The same hands that had once shaken weakly under morphine now felt steady in my memory, steady in this voice. And in that moment, I understood the gift he had truly left me. Not just the estate. Not just the foundation. His trust. His voice. His conviction. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sound fill the room again. It anchored me. Anchored me to purpose. Anchored me to him. Because anyone could challenge titles, wealth, or legal documents. But no one could challenge the truth that Evan had chosen me. And with that, I knew the fight ahead, against lawyers, against public scrutiny, against manipulated stories, was mine to face. But I was not alone. Not really. He was still here. Through voice. Through memory. Through the foundation. And that realization, quiet, unwavering, gave me the strength to prepare for what was coming next. The morning of the dedication dawned crisp and clear over Asheville Civic Center. Frost still clung to the edges of the parking lot, and the distant Blue Ridge Mountains were dusted with snow, a reminder that even in harsh conditions, life persists. I parked my car a little early, walking slowly across the pavement as the breath of winter fog curled in front of me. I could feel Evan's presence in the rhythm of my steps, a quiet encouragement that whatever happened today, the truth would finally be visible. Inside, volunteers were setting up the stage, banners fluttering softly overhead, Evan Mercer Foundation, building access, preserving dignity. Tables were arranged for families receiving grants, informational pamphlets stacked carefully, and a small tech corner displayed Evan's symptom tracking app on tablets for visitors to try. I could see the nervous energy in Jasmine Ortega, our PR consultant. She straightened every pamphlet, whispered directions to interns, and occasionally glanced at me, as if seeking reassurance that this morning would honor Evan properly. Mayor Jonathan Reese arrived early, shaking my hand with the kind of measured politeness reserved for public events but softened by his warm North Carolina drawl. He spoke quietly to me before the ceremony began. "This is more than a dedication," he said. "It's a statement. A life that mattered, made visible. You and Evan, you've done something rare." I nodded, forcing my voice steady. I didn't want to cry yet. Not in front of everyone. Not when this morning was about him. Dr. Helen Quaid, a public health advocate who had helped us map transportation grants to underserved rural communities, adjusted her glasses and walked over. "You've done the right thing, Linda. This is exactly the impact he would have wanted." As the Civic Center filled, I could see families from across western North Carolina, parents holding children, patients in wheelchairs, caregivers with tired but hopeful faces. The local press was present, though restrained, and a small group of volunteers lined the entryway to greet guests. The ceremony began quietly. I stood at the podium, cleared my throat, and spoke simply. Today isn't about money. It isn't about lawsuits. It isn't about claims or noise. Today is about Evan. About his vision. About the people he wanted to help and the lives he hoped to touch. A screen behind me flickered to life. For the first time in public, the unedited footage of Evan, speaking directly to me and the foundation, was shown. His words, calm and deliberate, filled the room. "Mom, keep moving forward. Protect what matters. Don't let the noise distract you from the work we started." Gasps, soft murmurs, and a few whispered sniffles spread through the audience. People leaned forward in their chairs. They didn't applaud yet. They weren't reacting to drama, they were absorbing truth. Then, the screen shifted. A single document appeared, the divorce waiver signed in Wake County, granting Evan full autonomy over his estate and clearly voiding any spousal claims. No words were necessary. The audience didn't need them. Their eyes moved across the document, lingering on the bolded clauses that confirmed Evan's intentions. I stepped back from the podium, letting the silence linger for a heartbeat longer than comfort. This was a moment of quiet reckoning. A moment where presence mattered more than performance. Several families approached me afterward, patients, caregivers, volunteers, sharing their own stories of trust, betrayal, and perseverance. One young mother from Hendersonville said softly, "I saw someone stand by what's right. Someone showed me that loyalty isn't invisible." I didn't respond much. I just nodded, knowing that the event itself, more than any speech or public statement, was building the narrative Evan wanted the world to remember: presence over absence, action over claims, truth over manipulation. By the end of the day, the Civic Center was buzzing, not with gossip or spectacle, but with purpose. Families were registering for grants, volunteers were helping with app demonstrations, and the unedited video had already gone viral in the local online networks. I stood back and watched. The story Evan had left behind was now living. It was visible. It was undeniable. And I knew, deep in my chest, that this was just the beginning. If you're watching and still hesitating to subscribe, ask yourself, if you had a loved one whose voice only you could carry forward, wouldn't you speak up too? Subscribe and leave a comment now to honor those who trusted you with their truth. The morning sun filtered weakly through the tall windows of Mecklenburg County Probate Court, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. I arrived early, choosing a seat near the back row. The room was modest, smaller than I imagined, far removed from the dramatized depictions in media, but its silence carried weight. There were no cameras, no reporters crowding the hall, just the neutral hum of ceiling fans and the occasional shuffle of papers. Judge Rebecca Harlan entered with the quiet authority that came from decades on the bench. Her robe brushed softly against the floor, each step measured, deliberate. I noted how she exuded calm, not a figure of theatrics, but one of methodical scrutiny. Her eyes scanned the room, resting briefly on Maribel Sloan, who had entered late, flanked again by her attorneys from Hollis and Kane LLP, looking poised but tense. The hearing began without flourish. The attorneys presented their motions succinctly, but it was clear this was no surprise to anyone. Maribel's claims of undue influence, emotional manipulation, and coercion had been dissected in meticulous filings. Every edited video, every cropped screenshot she had released on social media, every affidavit was already countered by an immovable wall of documentation. Elaine Porter, Evan's estate attorney, sat poised at the table with Marcus Ivey, Evan's longtime CPA, beside her. They didn't raise voices or make dramatic gestures. Every point was delivered calmly, backed by emails, memos, recordings, and witness statements. Terrence Bloom, the hospice night nurse, and Lydia Cho, Evan's product manager, were present in the gallery as quiet observers, their prior testimonies already documented in affidavits. Judge Harlan spoke slowly, weighing the filings. Upon review of the submitted materials, the court finds the claim of undue influence unsubstantiated. Evidence presented by the opposing party is, in multiple instances, intentionally misleading. The motion to contest the will is hereby dismissed in full. The word dismissed echoed quietly, yet profoundly, through the room. I exhaled softly, but I didn't smile. I didn't lean back in relief. This wasn't about theatrics. It was about justice, steady, precise, undeniable. Next came the sanctions. Harlan detailed the financial repercussions. Maribel would be responsible for the legal fees incurred during the rebuttal, a sum significant enough to leave a mark. Additionally, her attorney would undergo an ethics review for attempting to manipulate probate procedures. No one in the room cheered. The weight of accountability was heavier than applause. I stayed seated, letting it all settle. Around me, there was quiet murmuring, small acknowledgments of the court's thoroughness. Maribel's face remained composed, though her fingers twitched around the edge of her briefcase. She had prepared for confrontation, for spectacle, for outrage, but instead, she received methodical dismantling. I thought of the years leading to this moment, the nights at Duke University Hospital, the chemotherapy sessions, the sleepless vigils, the hospice nights filled with whispered reassurances and recorded reminders of Evan's wishes. Every ounce of care, every detail documented, had now been affirmed by the law, not as victory over a person, but as protection of truth. No one clapped when the session ended. Judge Harlan adjourned the hearing, her gavel tapping a steady, final note. I rose slowly, following Elaine Porter and Marcus Ivy toward the exit. Outside, the courtyard was cold and still, the kind of quiet that carries more relief than celebration. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. The story Evan wanted preserved had survived distortion. The legacy he entrusted to me was intact. As I walked to my car, I glanced back once. Maribel was leaving the courthouse, her expression unreadable, her presence diminished not by drama, but by the unassailable proof of truth. 2 weeks after the probate hearing, a letter arrived at my home. No return address, only my name written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Inside was a single line, almost hesitant. I need 5 minutes, just to say one thing in person. I didn't recognize it as an apology, nor a threat. I knew immediately who it was from. Maribel Sloan. I called the number scribbled at the bottom of the letter and agreed to meet at the North Carolina Arboretum Greenhouse in Asheville. Midday, neutral ground, away from lawyers, press, and the public eye. The kind of place where silence isn't awkward, it's purposeful. When I arrived, she was already there. She sat alone on a wrought iron bench among the orchids, their subtle fragrance filling the air. The sunlight traced golden patterns across her hair, and for a moment, I noticed the tension in her posture, the same tension she always carried when trying to claim control over a story she never truly lived. I approached slowly, keeping space between us. She didn't rise. I sat, careful to match the neutrality of the surroundings. For a full minute, neither of us spoke. The greenhouse hum, the faint trickle of a water feature, the flutter of leaves, became the background score of this delicate confrontation. Then, she finally spoke. "I'm angry," she said. Not loud, not accusatory, but clipped. Measured. The words were carefully chosen. Angry that I was written out of a history I thought was mine. Angry that the world now remembers him and his life without me. I thought, maybe I could reclaim a piece of the story by stepping back in, after he was gone. I listened. There was no need to interrupt. This wasn't about money or legal leverage. That had been settled. This was about relevance, recognition, and the fear of being forgotten. I let her speak for another moment before responding, calm and deliberate. Being forgotten isn't a punishment, Maribel. It's a consequence. You walked away when your presence was needed most. Legacy isn't reclaimed through dramatics, it's lived through presence. Through showing up when no one is watching. Through endurance, through care, through consistency. She looked down at the orchids, hands folded tightly in her lap. The silence that followed was not tense, it was reflective. The words had landed. I could see the weight of understanding in the slight slump of her shoulders. "I'm not here to ask for your help," she said finally. "I don't know what comes next." I nodded once, letting the space between us hold the finality of truth. "Then live it," I said. "Do better where you are. But don't attempt to rewrite the story you abandoned. The rest, it's yours to own. No handshake. No lingering gaze. Just a quiet nod, and she stood, stepping toward the path that led back to the parking lot. I watched her go, knowing this would be the last time our paths crossed in this context. As I turned to leave the greenhouse, I inhaled deeply. The orchids didn't need attention to thrive, they just existed, quietly commanding presence. And in that moment, I realized the final lesson of the entire ordeal. Truth and legacy are built through what you do when no one is looking. 6 months had passed since the courtroom hearings and the greenhouse meeting. The city of Asheville was already fading into spring when the first scholarship recipients gathered at the David Mercer Foundation headquarters. 12 young faces, bright with possibility, from rural and underserved communities, lined up to receive full funding for STEM programs. Cameras clicked, volunteers smiled, and I kept one hand resting lightly on the banner that bore Evan's name, his name now synonymous not with litigation or drama, but with purpose. Behind the scenes, the mobile oncology support app Evan had spent months designing went live in beta. Patients in Western North Carolina and beyond were using it to track medication schedules, coordinate rides to Duke University and Mission Hospital, and communicate with their care teams. It was his vision, technology built for humanity, and I could see it thriving. Meanwhile, Maribel had disappeared from the state entirely. Eugene, Oregon, became her quiet refuge. No announcements, no updates. The same woman who had stormed into the funeral, the will reading, and the courtroom, now simply gone. I felt neither triumph nor relief. Only a sense of finality. One late night, I found myself at my desk, reviewing the latest foundation reports. Budgets, grant allocations, program expansion plans. I sipped tea and glanced at a photo of Evan sitting in his wheelchair on the back porch, sunlight streaming through the trees, laptop open, fingers tapping at the very code that would help future patients. I whispered to him softly, not out of superstition, but out of habit and longing. "We did it, Evan. You would be proud." The night was quiet except for the soft hum of the computer and the occasional shuffle of papers. I realized the truth that had guided me through every legal motion, every edited video, every confrontation. The inheritance wasn't the millions. It wasn't about the courtroom victories or the legal documents. It was the responsibility to carry forward a life's work, to protect a legacy, and to show up when presence mattered more than applause. And in that responsibility, I found something stronger than wealth, stronger than vindication, meaning. Purpose. Continuity. Evan's legacy was alive, and in honoring it, I had become something more than a beneficiary. I had become its guardian.